Hi, and welcome to the Death and Sex Podcast. My name is Stephen Thomas, and I am here, as always, with Dr. Kailey Bradley. Say hello, Dr. Bradley.
Oh, welcome.
No, you're supposed to say hello, Dr. Bradley.
Sorry, I missed the...
It's okay. I'll key you up again. You ready? Say hello, Dr. Bradley.
Hello, Dr. Bradley. Oh, I don't think...
Don't worry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I don't think either of us are quite awake yet.
No, we're not. We're still dealing with sleep deprivation from just a busy week. But we're here, and today's topic, you want to introduce it, Kailey?
Yeah, we're going to facilitate a conversation this morning on how to have difficult conversations with children and adolescents. Certainly won't, be a comprehensive view. We just want to kind of give you some ideas. This may be, further conversations that we continue. Certainly a topic I'm passionate about as it pertains to grief and the death process. And I know, Stephen, you're passionate about this just in terms of having open and honest conversations with children and teens about sexuality and human development. So it's good to be here.
Me too. And let me just say, from my perspective, one of the areas that I do a lot of work in is with adults, couples, navigating sexual issues in that area, which we'll definitely have a podcast where we do more of that. So my area of expertise is not working with kids, but I'm more than happy to share what I've known or what I do know through the work that I've done. And definitely we can talk about some really amazing resources out there that adults of young kids or adolescents can look into when it comes to talking about these things. And if this isn't already made clear, we're in our 4th episode here, but we're both sex positive counselors. And what we mean by that is we are taking the approach that sex in all forms, as long as it is healthy and consensual, and there's shared values between the people that are engaging in the activity, that, anything at this point goes. And let's keep in mind that when it comes to minors can't consent, especially with another adult. That is not something that's possible. So that is something that it should not be happening. It happens, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. Definitely a different issue when you have 2 teenagers that are the same age that are talking about engaging in sex. And we can talk about that a little bit because I want to validate that that's a hard thing for a lot of people to navigate. What do I do when my kid's having sex or my teenager's having sex? And we can talk about that as well.
I also want to emphasize, and maybe you don't know this, Stephen, but there is a death positive movement that actually was originated and springboarded from the sex positive movement. Both of these topics are super taboo, and the death positive movement asserts that talking about death is not morbid, it shouldn't be taboo, and talking about death and dying and the dying process is something that actually is a really important part of what it means to be human. So, some interesting parallels.
I did not know that. Movements. Fun little history lesson there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's jump in.
Well, where do we want to start?
Yeah, I think the why. Why is it important to have difficult conversations with kids and teens? I think well-intended. Sometimes we believe they're too young to fully understand XYZ. We don't want to upset or cause pain to a child or teen. All of that makes sense, but I think it's important to talk about, why have these conversations, or why allow kids to bring these things up?
That's a great question, Kailey. Why? Shouldn't children be seen and not heard?
I mean, that is certainly a perspective. It is not a healthy one, in my opinion. But
pish posh. That's just some liberal nonsense that you're spouting.
Yeah, it's super interesting. Last week, I was at a conference for the National Alliance for Children's Grief, and there was a really great presentation, which actually gave me this idea for our podcast. And it was really all about talking to kids about death and grief. And the 2 presenters who were wonderful were sharing this story about fundamentally, when we're not honest about kids, particularly about grief, how confusing it can be. They shared a story. They were working with a young kid, and tragically, this little guy's dad had been shot and killed. And none of the adults in his life, and it makes sense, but really knew how to talk about it. And so for some reason, this little guy believed that his dad was an astronaut in space. That's where he was.
Wow.
And what was really, though, disconcerting is he began to say, I just want to go to space, be an astronaut with daddy, right? Because we didn't or not we, but there weren't open and honest. Sorry, there's a fly buzzing around here.
I see that. There's a fly in your screen.
It's driving me crazy. But when we use euphemisms with children, when we don't give them the full picture, not only is it confusing, but it also kind of erodes trust between an adult and a child. A child may say, if they've lied to me about this, like, what else are they lying to me about? Right? That doesn't feel good to be lied to.
Well, and I think that's where, so a couple of things that you just said that just like sparked stuff in my brain. So the coffee is working.
We're waking up. We're waking up.
We'll keep it going. Well, so a couple of things. First of all, okay, it's not quite there yet.
Not working yet.
It's still on its way.
Euphemism.
I'm not even going to try. All right. Are not good between a child and an adult. It's also not good between two adults. Case in point, a friend of ours who's a minister in our area was part of a group chat with other ministers, and the comment this text thread between they're not youth ministers, excuse me, they are actual pastors. I said youth ministers. I'm so sorry. But between the pastors, the actual pastors, adult pastors communicating with each other, they referred to somebody that I guess many people in that group knew, and made the euphemism, got it there a little bit, that this person had gone to glory. And
what does that even mean?
When you think about that for a second, one, what does that mean? From a sex therapist perspective, I was like, that sounds like a really great thing. Good for them. They went to glory. All right, having a good time. But what that pastor meant to say was that person had died. And for the same reason why, doctors are taught to use the word, your loved one died, use that word died and not passed on. It provides clarity because it can create miscommunication. It can create confusion about, well, my person's still okay, or they're going to be okay, or okay, they've done this. Maybe in the context of that text thread, those pastors using that type of lingo with each other might have understood. Yeah. But I do think it also speaks to how hard it is for even adults to talk about death and hard topics. And then the other thing that you kind of activated in my brain when you're talking about it just went right out the window. So if it comes back, I'll try to remember it.
Jump back in. I'm wondering, too, if there's some parallels here in the ways in which we use euphemisms surrounding conversations about sexuality with children, too.
Well,
and I wonder if you can explain a little bit maybe why that can be problematic when we use proper anatomical language with our kids and teens.
Yeah. Well, my favorite anecdote here is we were visiting some friends. This was a while back, and we had our dog with us. And Zane and Jen Sanders, I'll give them a shout out. They know who they are. I hope they know who they are. Anyway, they were teaching their kids how to use proper anatomical terms. And we were over at their house, and the little girl, she must have been 5 or 6. And she was like, I see Scout's vulva. And I just thought that was great and awesome. And what's great and awesome about that is when we teach kids to use terms like that, not only are we empowering them with knowledge, we're also giving them the tools to keep themselves safe. One of the worst things that can happen is you give your child a euphemism for their body part, whether that's, we're talking about a vulva, vagina, penis, balls, testicles, fill in the blank, whatever. Teaching the proper anatomical terms are great because if there's someone that is experiencing abuse, they can communicate that effectively with an adult. I think one of the stories that I've heard goes, a little kid was telling their teacher in school, so-and-so relative was playing with my cookie. And the teacher thought that was really weird. Why would this kid talk about some adult playing with their cookie? That doesn't make any sense. And cookie meant vulva or whatever was whatever was going on in that moment. So that's just a really great reason why we want to have very clear communications with our kids about our body parts, about sex, because if we don't be explicit in talking about some of these things, that's where abuse happens. And this is really important for everybody here to know. 90%, 91%, it's a figure in there, of sexual assault, coercion happens between either a domestic partner or a family member. I think it's like 51% domestic partner, 51% family member or close friend of the family. Only 8 to 9% of sexual assault of any kind happens with a stranger. And so It's so important to have that level of communication with your kids, with other family members, because if you don't, that's where you're going to see abuse happen.
Yeah, I think information and access to information is power, right? And again, I think one of the other mistakes I think adults make when having tough conversations with kids, whether it's about grief or sexuality, I often feel like we put so much pressure on ourselves that we have to have an answer to every question that a kid is going to ask us. And I would encourage all of us, release yourself from that pressure. It's okay. And it's really actually meaningful when an adult says to a child, you know what, buddy, I don't know. What do you think about that? Right? Let's explore that together, or let's see what we can find out. I think conversation is more important than feeling like you have to have an automatic response or an automatic answer. So sometimes slowing things down a little bit, like, hey, let's take a minute to think about that. Often when a kid brings up a really difficult subject, I think we have a kind of a fight or flight reaction. We get really like, oh gosh, I have no idea what to say. And then we kind of go into hyperdrive and try to, kind of maybe unintentionally say something. Again, it's okay to slow it down. It's okay to not have a response when, our kids ask questions. You're also modeling that, guess what? Even adults don't have it all figured out.
Yeah. I think that speaks a lot, and this is getting a little off topic here, but I think it speaks a lot to the nature and idea that we have to have an answer. We have to know everything, especially in this knowledge of information being at our fingertips with our phones or our computers. Like, we have to have an answer. We have to have the right answer. If I don't have the right answer, I'm going to fail my kid, or I'm going to fail myself. And so again, I think it's really great, even as counselors, when we're working with a client and we say, you know what, I don't know, because we don't, we can't be the answers and be the avatars for people. When we do that, whenever we try to save other people, by trying to have all the answers or trying to fix everything, we make ourselves into saviors for that person. Yeah. And I always like to say, saviors get crucified. It's not a fun thing to do. And unlike Jesus, you're probably not going to come back from the dead in 3 days. So definitely don't fall into that trap that I have to have the answers for everything, because nobody does. I mean, we're sitting here, we're talking, and I've already acknowledged up front, I don't know a lot of the answers to this, because a lot of these aren't the demographics of clients or the area that I specialize in. And that's okay. I can talk about it as long as I'm willing to acknowledge, I don't have all the answers, and that's okay. But I'm here to talk about what I do know and provide resources and point you in the right direction if I can. And I think even as parents, we can say to our kids, and you tell me what you think about this, Kailey, like, I don't know, but let me look at it. Maybe let's go pick up this book and read it together and find the answer together. And I think that is probably incredibly rewarding for a kid to see a parent say, one, I don't know, but then also do the work with them so that they can get the tools to do that same work later as they develop.
Kids are naturally inherent little scientists, right? They're constantly exploring the world around them. They're constantly conducting their own little experiments, trying to figure out certain things. Again, I think, don't curb that process and let it kind of happen organically. I think you raise a good point too, that it is often our own adult anxiety that sometimes gets in our way. And I want to validate that. And I'm not trying to judge it in any way, but I think we all have what I call a rescuer part that comes online when a kid is in distress, but it's not necessarily our job to take those feelings away from a kid when they're upset. Right. It's more important that we're just a safe base where they can explore those feelings, right? I think, again, adults sometimes will say, oh, it's not that bad. You're fine. You shouldn't feel that way. You're good.
Yeah, or you're too young to ask that question. Yeah. How many times were you told this? I'll tell you when you're older. And God, as a kid, I remember being told that multiple times, and it drove me crazy. Yeah. And like, why? Why can't I know now? Like, definitely there's a way that we can explain things to kids at age development levels that are appropriate to explore those hard things. I think it speaks more to the parent that if you say you're too young to know this, or I'll tell you when you're older, I think it speaks more to us as adults, our own feelings of inadequacy and fears. Again,
it's that sense that we have to have all the answers, but that's not what it means to be an adult, in my opinion. Right. I think being an adult is more about leaning into the questions and saying, there's a lot about this world and how it operates that I don't fully understand.
Kailey, do you think it has more to do with, I want to agree because I was making the same point that, yeah, that's definitely plays a role in it. But where I have to imagine that the other piece of this puzzle, and I'm sure there's many, but the other really big one is I don't want to expose my kid to something like this too young. Like I will rob them of their innocence, or I will create further harm by having this conversation or explaining it. What are your thoughts about that?
I hear that. I validate it. I think, though, when we, again, kind of quickly stop a conversation from happening, I think that kind of creates some shame. Like, oh, mommy had a strong reaction to that. I guess I'm not supposed to talk about that. Or I guess I feel funny about bringing that up to mommy or daddy. They don't, they had a negative reaction to it. So again, I think being honest too about our own emotions in front of our kids, right? Again, maybe as a parent saying, you know what, buddy, I need to take a minute. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed. It's a good question, but I just need to, take a minute, take a breath, take a beat. And then, let's talk about this again together. Collaboration, involve your child in that process of finding answers. Again, they're little scientists. And again, leaning into that and leveraging that is really important. I don't know if that answered your question fully.
Well, it did a little bit. So like I think the question that maybe can help with this is there an age that is too young to talk about death, divorce, racism, violence, sex? What are your thoughts?
Well, there is a developmental perspective here. The example that I'll use is suicide loss.
Okay.
We often assume if we bring suicide loss up with a child or a teen, we're somehow planting seeds and they're then going to want to harm themselves. Research has shown the opposite.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not to say, developmentally, a young child who experiences somebody they love dying by suicide, they're not going to have that full comprehensive understanding of what happened. But that doesn't mean, I think, even with young kids, we can use the word suicide.
Mm-hmm.
There may be more in-depth questions as they developmentally age. Okay. They may, let's say they experienced a suicide loss as a young child. The way that they comprehend that is going to be very different than when they're 14, 15, 16. Right. And so that's why I think, too, the importance of ongoing conversations and ongoing dialogue about these topics is so key. It's not a one and done. Like, all right, I had the quote unquote sexuality talk with my child. We're done. We've crossed that off our to-do list. Or, we've broached this topic of loss. We're good. It's just not the way that I think is a healthy approach. I think it has to be an ongoing dialogue.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, is there an age that's too young? I think infants are able to grieve, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we're old enough to attach, which guess what? We're born old enough to attach. I think we should experience grief. And so again, it may not be, the conversation we would have with an older child, but I do think that we can still have the conversation.
And would you say that from your perspective, that would be true on most of the topics that we've been talking about here?
I think so. And again, kids, they're very intuitive.
Mm-hmm.
They know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
And I think we automatically are. I hear this a lot. Kids are resilient. They don't really need to talk about it. They're just inherently resilient. Because
they're resilient, they don't need to talk about it?
I hear this a lot.
But is it the point of resilience that if you do talk about it, they're resilient and they'll be okay?
Yes, because I think resiliency is something, in my opinion, that's formed in connection with others. And so you need those spaces to talk and to process. So no, a child is not just automatically resilient, right? I mean, I think they need that support. They need that ability, again, to know that what they're experiencing is valid, to know what they're experiencing is normal, to know that the questions they have are appropriate and they can ask them. That's how resiliency flourishes, in my opinion.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about sex with kids, if a child starts asking details like, where does a baby come from? Mm-hmm. There's, if you start to get into the weeds of stuff, you're going to start explaining some anatomical terms and things that might be a little overwhelming. And definitely, I want to validate that for you as the adult, that might be really hard to do. Mm-hmm. But to that idea of resilience, I think a lot of kids don't always understand what's being explained to them at the time. I know a great example that I heard from an actual OBGYN was they had a family member at one point in time it came out that this family member had abused multiple cousins in the family. And so the OB/GYN was explaining that they and their partner made the very conscious choice to talk about sex regularly and frequently with their kids of all ages, using the proper anatomical terms, not being afraid to ask questions, even, depending on the age, maybe probably not 3 or 4, but definitely as they got older, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, talking about, this is how sex works. These are the terms. This is what happens. And what I think we find from this OB's perspective, but also what we find in research is that kids will ask questions and you can explain them. And what happens when they get their answer? Okay. And then they go on with their life, right? Like there's that resiliency piece. Okay. And they go on with their life. And then as they get older and then they start to figure things out, they put things together, like that's what that meant. But now they have the tools because you've given them to them that when they finally are able to make those connections in their growing, developing little brains, they're prepared and they understand that's what that meant. So you're not harming the child by not talking about it because, as you pointed out, they are resilient enough to be able to hold the knowledge, even though they might not quite get it. And it sounds weird and confusing because if you were to explain sex to an alien that came out of nowhere and landed on this planet, and we had to explain how we have sex and how we copulate and how we make more humans, like it would sound a little weird, probably. I don't, depending on that alien's sexual practices. I don't know. I'm just assuming. Anyway, the point is that if you talk about sex with your kids, you are not warping them. You're not harming them. I do remember back in the day, I used to be a youth pastor, and this was as I was very early in my master's program to be a counselor. I made probably at the time the poor choice to say, hey, we should talk to our kids about sex because I was very aware of the fact that teenagers have sex. They have sex. They just do. And if we want our kids to be healthy, we need to talk about it. The worst thing we can do is not talk about it. And we don't have to shame them in it. We just have to talk about it because what happens when you talk about sex or suicide or death with your kids? You make yourself the expert. You make yourself the safe person to talk to about it, especially if you do it on a regular basis. And I'm not just like once a year birds in the bee or once in a lifetime birds in the bee conversation. I'm talking about sitting at the dinner table and just having a normal conversation about it, normalizing the taboo subject. Because back to my story, when I was trying to do this, the comments I often got, even from people that I respected who were medical practitioners, were like, well, I remember when so-and-so was very young, they were exposed to sex. And by exposed to sex, I'm not sure what that meant. If that was porn, which is a whole nother matter, or if that was just the knowledge of sex. And that led them down a road where they were, engaging in, premarital activities or having sex as a teenager, blah, blah, blah.
Correlation doesn't mean causation, though.
Yeah, exactly. Correlation does not mean causation. And what we know is, and not just in this country, but in countries around the world where we have really good sex education in our schools. This is more so abroad than necessarily in Midwest Ohio. But when we have really good sex education, when we do have regular conversations about sex and we don't make it taboo, what we end up doing is creating healthier opportunities for our kids to talk to us about this topic, whether it's sex, whether it's death, whether it's violence.
Well, and when we, I'm thinking about a parent, if you haven't maybe situated yourself as the safe person that your child can come to, they're going to go to their peers, which first, is normal. It's going to happen, but your child's peers they're not going to have correct information when it comes to these really difficult topics, right? And so then there's not an ability, I don't think, to know exactly, what information they're ingesting. It becomes more challenging. But I think if you have situated yourself as this kind of safe, hospitable base, that there's no shame, right? When, your kid comes to you with questions, I think that's really powerful, right? I think
it is really powerful.
Hides in secrecy, right? And so when we don't feel comfortable bringing something up, shame just kind of festers.
It does.
That's not good.
90%, I think the statistic the last time I looked, and it's been a while, but 90% of kids learn about sex from their peers or the internet. only 10% get any sort of a sexual education from a trusted parent, guardian, or even maybe like a teacher, like a sex ed teacher. And so right there is all the reason in the world to start having more dialogue with all of these topics, but especially sex with your teenager, with your young kid. Because if you don't start having that regular conversation now, yeah, they're going to learn about it. And then you don't know where they're learning about it from. And again, make yourself the expert. Keep in mind, like, I want to validate talking about this stuff is hard. We don't have kids. We have 2 golden doodles and we talk to them about sex all the time. But when you talk, I want to validate it. The person that's going to struggle and feel uncomfortable is you. And yeah, your kid might squirm a little, but why are they squirming? Because they're not used to having this conversation with you. Well, and if you can have the conversation, like, it's going to start feeling less and less uncomfortable. What were you going to say, Kailey?
Yeah, sorry that I interrupted there. I think
you're allowed to interrupt me. Don't apologize. I'm a man. You're a woman. You can kick me down when I'm down. That's all right. No, I'm beaten.
Brother.
Assert yourself, woman. Feminist.
You said a little bit ago something that I wanted to revisit when you talked about how, you may have a conversation with a kid and they're like, okay. Makes me think of, you may tell a child, I'm so sorry to tell you, like, grandma or grandpa is really sick or
has gone to glory.
Has gone to but it's really appropriate that, guess what? They're probably going to, they may say, oh, okay. And then they're going to go outside and play. And then maybe a couple of days later, they may come back and want to talk about it more. And then they're going to go back and play. Like, that jumping in and out. I use the image, it's almost like a puddle for kids. They're jumping in a puddle and then they're kind of, again, it's that normal oscillation between encountering our grief and kind of stepping back from it, encountering our grief and stepping back from it. I think kids really do this well, and that's normal. Sometimes parents will say to me, like, I don't think my kid is grieving because they're, they're still playing or they're still XYZ, but like, yeah, they're still grieving and that's okay. Like, and a lot of times they're processing it through their play or through their drawing, or, there's a lot of ways. I think I've said this in another podcast. A kid or a teen is probably not going to say to me, Miss Kailey, I'm really grieving today. They're probably not, right?
Yeah, that would be pretty impressive to hear that kid say that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But you know what?
Good insight there, teen.
Right. But they may play it out with me. They may want to share a song with me that reminds them of their loved one. They may dance it out, to use the Grey's Anatomy phrase, right? Dance it out.
Yeah.
So all that to say, like, again, that's really normal, right? Not, again, it has to be that ongoing dialogue, because it's not a one and done. It'd be easier, cross that off the to-do list, but it's not.
It's not, but I do think it's important, as you said, to have those dialogues and just do that kind of checking in yourself of what's going on in you, that you might be struggling, and give your kid the permission to pop in and out. Because I think if you're uncomfortable with the topic, and this maybe is going back more so to what I was saying, so apologies. But if your kid is popping in and out and you're having a hard time with just being caught off guard, like, again, like, ask yourself what's going on in you that you're having a hard time with this conversation. Because I want to validate, we're adults and we have our own baggage and we have our own shame around this stuff that we don't want to pass on to our kids, which might be why we're having a hard time talking about it. I think one that points to the fact, that, hey, maybe we still have our own needs, our own unmet needs, developmental needs that we still need to maybe work on. What do I need to do to take care of myself, to provide those resources for my child? And why am I having such a hard time with it? This is a tactic, not a tactic. I shouldn't say that, but it's an approach I use a lot with some of my clients that are really struggling with these hard conversations. I will often frame it, if you're struggling with this now because you didn't get X, Y, or Z for yourself, when your kid gets older, what do you want to do for them? How do you want to model this for your kid? Because we as human beings learn so much from observation, especially children. We learn a lot as kids growing up through observation. And if we can model healthy dialogue around these hard topics, but even just like, the way that mom and dad interact with each other when they show affection through a hug or a kiss. I mean, a lot is learned in that. It's often why when I have couples that are like, we don't really want to stay together, but we're doing it for the kids. I'll ask the question, no judgment, but is that the best thing for your kid? What are you, by choosing to stay together for your kid, even though you don't love each other anymore, what are you modeling for them as far as relationships in the future? So
Behavior
those are
is
just
learned.
Yeah, all behavior is learned, whether explicitly or implicitly.
And it's why I love the concept of scaffolding, in that, we help our kids build a window of tolerance by, providing that scaffolding, providing that resource. And again, that's where the developmental approach comes in. They may not fully, be able to navigate being thrown into the deep end of a tough conversation as a very young kid, but we can still scaffold, right? And help them build that window of tolerance. And as they age, we're giving them maybe some more and more resources, and they're able to kind of, again, comprehend things at a deeper level.
I like that. That's really good. What else should we talk about here, Kailey, before we decide to wrap up?
Yeah, I want to,
because I feel like we've had a lot of really good conversation here, but I know we're still missing a few things that we wanted to touch on today.
I will say one, just frequent question I get in terms of tough topics with kids, I get this a lot, is should children go to funerals? And as somebody who is a death positive counselor, as a thanatologist, my immediate response is always usually, yeah, it's really healthy. I think there's some preparation work that has to be done ahead of time, right?
Okay, like what?
Yeah, preparing your child for what they might see, that the adults in the room are going to maybe be expressing different emotions. And maybe that might be a little scary at first, okay? And just explaining that to them. Explaining, you may see something called a casket, okay? And the body in the casket may look different than your and I's body looks, right? And that's where a really good opportunity as well to have conversations about what does death mean, right? Because kids can engage in what we call magical thinking, especially our younger kids, that, if I do something, I can bring this person back, or maybe something I did cause this person to die. That magical thinking can be really, really prevalent. And so it's really important, to have those conversations with kids about that. Unfortunately, death is irreversible. Okay. And it's nothing that you did. The body stopped working. That's usually how I frame it. The body stopped working. And even when it comes to traumatic losses like suicide loss, right? I explain suicide sometimes happens when our brains aren't working properly. And then I always remind kids too that, it's not though like a cold or the flu that you can catch. This is kind of a different body not working, right? Because here's the other thing too, and this was really insightful from my training last week. When we say things like, grandma was sick and died, what does that mean then when a child then goes to the doctor and has the flu and the doctor is like, oh, well, you're sick with the flu? What is that child going to assume?
They think they're going to die.
They think they're going to die, right? And so I think we use this language with kids, and I know I'm kind of going off the funeral thing here for a second, but
no, please do.
Being specific, right? Again, that there are different, types of sickness. Yeah. Anyway, back to the funeral thing. So the prep work ahead of time, I think, is really important. Having a support person there for the child or teen, that way, if they get overwhelmed, that they know there's somebody there kind of just for them, that if they need to sneak out and take a moment, that they're there to kind of help through that. Also, if a kid is at a funeral, bring snacks and also something maybe comforting, a stuffed animal, a coloring sheet.
I like that.
Just something that is there for them. Again, because they may not be familiar with everything that's going to be happening. I love it and I know more hospice organizations and funeral homes are doing this, but allowing a child to tour a funeral home before a funeral. So again, just so they familiarize themselves with
that's really cool.
This is like what is going on. A lot of funeral homes now have therapy dogs, which I just totally dig. Again, I think providing those points of comfort for a child is really, really key. There's a wonderful resource on the National Alliance for Children's Grief webpage on creating kid-friendly spaces in funerals, as well as kind of how to do some of this prep work. I was actually a part of the task force that put those workbooks together, but they're free and you can download those. It's the National Alliance for Children's Grief. They have so many wonderful resources. Just want to, give them all the applause and all of the I just love the work that they do. But I think, yes, a kid can go to a funeral, and I think it's really important and appropriate. I think a lot about my maternal grandmother lost her mother when she was only 16, and she often will say that you just didn't talk about it.
Yeah. And what do you think? And what do you think the consequences of not talking about it would be for a kid? So we're talking about all the things we want to do, and the outcome is, hey, your kid is resourced, your kid has knowledge, your kid is able to not only communicate better around these topics, but also we're able to have a clear understanding of what's going on and be able to do some inner work. What do you think is the outcome if we don't do some of these things? What are the walls that we'll hit?
I always say that bereavement support for children and teens is preventative mental health care, because when we don't have the space to process grief, it's not that like that grief just goes away, right? It just may come out in behaviors that, you know, unfortunately make it kids into trouble. You know, you may see an increase in like, you know, kids who have experienced a loss, risky behavior, you know, if they're a teenager. You may see an increase in just being pissed off at the world and maybe getting into fights. And that's not something that, you know, it was the norm. Again, I think creating that space, allowing the processing to happen, is preventative mental health care. My first counseling job that I ever had, I was working with juveniles in a locked residential treatment center. And these were kids that had severe behavior issues, severe substance use stuff going on. But really, what they really needed was space to talk about their grief and loss. They had never been given that, and they had significant traumatic losses. And I remember sitting thinking, I would probably respond in the same way. Like, I get it. Like, I get why you're reacting this way, right? You are engaging in what we call protest emotions. Like, this terrible injustice and terrible thing happened, and I am not okay with it, right? And we have to give space also for kids to be angry. And we're really afraid for kids to be angry.
Why do you think that is?
Because anger, I think, is an emotion that scares the crap out of adults when they see it in kids. In fact, I'm reading a really good book right now called Killing Monsters, about the importance of like rough and tumble play and aggressive, quote unquote, aggressive play in kids. Again, I think that anger scares us. But again, that's more of our own adult anxiety than it is actual problematic behavior.
Yeah, if all behavior is communication and your kid doesn't have the tools to communicate what's going on, it's going to be expressed through behavior.
But
And
we really want, though, compliant kids.
We want compliant behavior. We want compliant kids. Yes. Because it makes us feel like, how about this? Would you say that's because it makes us as adults feel like we're doing our job right?
Yeah, we have defined successful parenting as a child who's well behaved, who
straight A's,
doesn't question, who does what they need to do. But just because a kid isn't asking questions or a kid isn't expressing emotions, that's not always a positive thing.
Yeah. Good stuff, Kailey. Good stuff.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. You're just making me think about, I'm sitting here in silence because I'm thinking about a lot of the things I hear you say and things that I've seen in working with other counselors. I'm even thinking about my own experience as a kid and just, that expectation of do as I say because I'm the adult, or, and I see this all the time. I saw this all the time growing up with other kids and their parents, and even as a youth pastor briefly seeing it. Do as I say. Why? Because I'm the adult, because I'm your parent, and you have to respect what I say because I'm the parent. And that definitely always drove me crazy, especially when we think about respect is earned. No, it's not just you do this.
Mutual thing. And I also, and I do want to validate. I think there's so much judgment on parents, right? I mean, what do we do when we see a kid acting up in public? We automatically stare at the parent, right? We make internal judgments. Seriously, I want everybody listening to do the little activity. The next time you're somewhere and you see a child, quote unquote, acting up, what are the automatic thoughts that pop into your head? I guarantee most of us think something like, God, they need a parent to get them in line, right?
Yeah, or what's going on. Yeah. Well, I remember saying very similar things to you at one point about kids or our friends that had kids, or just different contexts where we would be like, I don't know if I'd feel comfortable with that or if I would let my kid do that. And I think, again, because of my own upbringing, you kind of really pushed back hard on me and you said, no, I would not I would not do that. And I would not want you to do that. And I think you may have even said I would not let you do that because again, like what is that kid doing? That kid is trying to express behavior. That kid is trying to express something. And I think it spoke to my own upbringing that I wasn't allowed in certain situations, not all the time, but definitely in certain situations to express myself in certain ways. And
and as adults, we're kidding ourselves if we think that we're always completely regulated and not responding in ways that sometimes we would chastise our children for behaving in that way, right? Like if I'm hungry, like I'm not a nice person.
Vouch for it.
Like I'm probably going to be a little, a little hangry.
Well, and if I'm tired or if I just woke up, you know, I'm not going to be a pleasant person.
Yeah. So again, why do we expect our kids to behave in ways that we sure as hell don't as adults?
Right. Exactly. I was also thinking about the fact you had mentioned when you take kids to a funeral home, you know, bring some snacks, bring a coloring book, bring a stuffy. Yeah. Why don't we do that as adults? Why don't we bring our own coloring books or snacks or stuffed animals? You know, we should definitely have that. I mean, in a certain sense, we kind of already do with our phones. You know, our phones are very much a security blanket.
Security blanket for sure.
Yeah. And so why aren't we giving those to our kids? I
don't know, because goldfish solve the world's problems.
Animal crackers. Yeah.
Animal crackers.
I'm with you.
Fish. No, this is really good stuff. And I could talk about children in grief all day long. It's
I know you
my
could.
passion. And I think it's such an important part of what it means to be human, what it means to live well. I always remember what Dr. Wolfelt, my mentor, says that if we can learn to, and I apologize to Dr. Wolfelt because I'm probably not going to get it perfect, but something along the lines of when we learn to grieve well, we learn to live well and then to love well.
Real quick, since we were talking about death here, we've talked also about sex and just a couple of thoughts that I've jotted down about talking to kids about sex. So definitely there's nothing wrong with talking about things like menstruation, erections, body changes, being curious about sex, even before puberty. Like there's nothing wrong with talking about that. And you can, you know, and definitely I want to validate, like it's hard. So, and kids are going to be like, what? Penis gets hard? What? Like, that's weird. Like validate that. Like, and don't be afraid to maybe even have a little bit of fun with it, you know, because when you think about sex, it's a little silly. It's a little silly. The whole act of it, it can feel and even seem a little silly. So don't be afraid to engage with it and talk about it, normalize it. If you want to have a little fun with it, that's okay. We're not doing anything harmful to our child by talking about those things and using those terms. We're not exposing them to anything bad. And definitely give them internet and media literacy when it comes to things like about bodies, sex, and porn. And definitely as we get into the adolescent age, making sure, I would say even before adolescence, consent, talk about consent. Consent is so important. And that how to ask for consent, using the actual word consent. And then once they kind of master that, you know, you can always find very creative ways, especially as you get older and you start dating, how to ask for consent in ways that you make sure you have verbal consent without maybe using the word consent, you know.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yes.
When you're talking about consent, I think about how frequently we say things to kids like, oh, your uncle so-and-so really wants a hug. You need to go hug them.
Yes.
You know, a kid may be like, I don't want to. No, you need to do that. You need to go hug them.
Or you've just gotten into a fight with your brother, sibling, cousin.
Yeah.
You need to go give them a hug. They said they're sorry. You need to say you're sorry. Okay, now you need to go hug. And go ahead, follow that thought. Why don't we want to do that?
Because that's not validating. I'm still mad. Like I'm still ticked off. And I haven't seen change behavior yet. So I don't want to.
Yeah. And it also robs us of our autonomy. It robs us of our ability to say no. And definitely we want our kids to have the ability, especially when it comes to physical touch, engaging in intimate acts like hugging, of being able to say no. Because what happens if you say, oh, you need to go give that adult a hug? Then the next time another adult who's a stranger or another family member that maybe shouldn't be asking for a hug asks for a hug.
Yeah.
That's where things
is so important for kids. It's so key to human development to feel like the adults in my life as a kid and teen think I am capable enough to make some of my own decisions, right? And I don't just have to do what an adult tells me to do because they're an adult, right? No
Right.
is a complete sentence.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No means no. Yes. Our youngest doodle, Jem, has a hard time understanding that his sister, Scout, is not giving consent all the time when she wants to play. When he wants to play, he has a hard time understanding what does the word consent mean. Why doesn't my sister want to play with me? We try to teach, but he's a little stubborn and he struggles. But he's a golden doodle, so we'll give him a grace.
It's okay. Yeah,
it's okay. We'll get there. So talking about consent is important. Also talking about pleasure. Pleasure matters. Sex should be safe. It should be respectful. It should be enjoyable. And it should be enjoyable for everybody. I have had clients that have told me, I was just told that sex was for men.
Oops,
and
sorry, you froze there for a second, Stephen. Can you repeat what you just said?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
You're good now.
I've heard from clients that they were told, sex is not for you. Sex is for the other partner, or sex is for men, or sex is something that you just have to do. Close your eyes and get through it because, that's your duty as a spouse, or you're not supposed to enjoy sex because sex is about procreation. And let's be very clear. Sex can be about procreation. And we can definitely have sex, consensual adult sex with our partner where maybe we don't get orgasmic pleasure, but we do get pleasure in giving our partner pleasure. And that's okay. But pleasure matters, and sex should always be safe. It should always be respectful. It should always be enjoyable. And porn literacy, understanding that porn is entertainment. It is not education. There's some really great resources out there for education around sex, especially for women. OMG Yes is a really great resource for adult women who are trying to understand and learn what do they like about their body and how do they like to engage in sex. And it has some amazing resources and tools. And then also on OMG Yes, they'll talk about different techniques and strategies of how to enjoy sex either solo or with a partner. And then there are videos on there where that does show different women demonstrating those techniques on themselves. So you do see vulvas and vaginas, but that never feels, from my perspective, like pornography. It very much feels like education because there's dialogue, there's conversation over the video as they're explaining the technique, as they're talking about what they're doing. Are they getting pleasure a little bit while they're doing it? Sure. They're touching very sensitive parts of their body that are designed to give us pleasure, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it is pornographic. I had a professor in college that said there is no such thing as a pornographic text. There's only a pornographic interpretation of a text. Whether you agree with that or not, I can very much say that from my perspective, the text does not feel in any way pornographic. It is very much educational in how it's being expressed. And so finding tools or resources like that, finding really great books, and a couple of books that pop into my head right now. Shoot, and I've just forgotten the name, but there's a book, Kailey, maybe you remember Every Young Boy's Body book. I'll have to look it up. Maybe we can put it in our resources.
I thought you were going to say Every Young Man's Battle, and I was like, oh, please don't recommend that, Bill.
No, I wasn't going to say that. No, we'll put some resources in the text of the podcast notes or on our social media. We'll get it up there for sure. But there's some really good books out there for young adults and young kids, adolescents, and yes, young adults too. Okay, but porn, back to the idea of porn is education, or porn is entertainment. It is not education. And so making sure that we're very clear that if we have a teen that has engaged or is curious about porn, that we're very clear this isn't how sex works. Okay. And it's okay also not to want sex. Everybody has their own timeline. And validating people that might even be asexual. Asexual people can have really great sex, but they're not necessarily going to desire sex or want to think about it or engage with it in a way that a neurotypical or also non-asexual person would want to engage with it. If your kid ever asks the question, I'm not ready for sex, be honest, and say that's great. Or if they say, I do think I'd like to have sex with my boyfriend or girlfriend, first of all, don't be afraid, respond with empathy and talk about, tell me more about that. What's going on that you think you'd want to do this now? You're still pretty young. Do you feel safe and respect in this relationship? Do you know the importance of safe sex? Do you feel ready? Tell me more about that. What's going on that you think you feel ready for this? Don't shame them and say, well, you're not ready. How do you know? You're only 16, you're only 17. Definitely, if you do that, you're going to create shame and you might have the reverse impact an outcome that you would want it to have. Definitely, if we can create a safe space to have dialogue, and you can say your piece about, I can validate that you think you'd like to do this and that you feel ready. And I think that's great that you might feel that way. Here's some things that I just want you to think about. Here's some things that I might be concerned about if you move ahead. Here's some things that, you need to be really mindful of if you choose to do this now. And that can create a really great way for you and your child to have, or teenager to have, really great dialogue about engaging in healthy sexual activity, and might even get them to rethink, maybe I'm not ready. Or, again, giving them the comments to be like, when they are ready, that they know what they're doing, and that you've done everything you can to make sure they're safe, to protect from STIs, unwanted pregnancy, and to make sure that they have a partner that respects them. Because that's obviously the last thing we want, is for our kids to engage in sexual activity where they're not being respected by their partners. So definitely talk about those things, talk about pleasure, talk about the importance of advocating for themselves. And real quick on masturbation. Masturbation is a very, very normal, natural, healthy way to engage in sexual activity as an adult, but also as an adolescent that's learning about their bodies. We know that, especially for young women, it can be very helpful for them in that it gives them tools and the ability to understand how they like to be touched, how they enjoy sex, and then they can communicate that to their partner. Mm-hmm. And that can be a very positive way for them to engage. Keep in mind, it's a regulation tool. There's nothing wrong with masturbation in that you're getting a number of things when you masturbate. You're getting a dopamine hit. You're getting some of those really good chemicals in your brain that can help you navigate different crossroads at life. You're also empowering yourself, and you're learning about yourself and your body. I think parents are often afraid, well, my kid might be masturbating too much. And let's be honest, if you're an adolescent teen, how much is too much? You're learning about your body. Your hormones are going crazy. You're going to masturbate. Let's keep in mind, there's no such thing as sex addiction in the DSM.
That could be a whole other podcast.
And that can be a whole other podcast. The key thing is that, like anything else in the world, whether we're talking about weed, whether we're talking about alcohol, whether we're talking about video games, whether we're talking about something like exercise, there is a point where we can engage in all of those things too much, that it disrupts our life, our day-to-day living, our ability to cope and regulate. If your kid is, quote, masturbating too much to the point where they're not able to function effectively as in their schoolwork, in their after-school activities, whether it be, sports, the arts, whatever, then maybe there's a conversation that needs to be had of like, hey, buddy, hey, pal, what's going on that, we're doing this. I noticed that this is important. You're thinking about a lot. What teenager doesn't? But, maybe we need to just have a conversation about this is maybe an every now and then thing instead of an all the time thing. Just because, hey, I see that it's getting in the way of school. It's getting in the way of after school activities. And again, is that going to be uncomfortable? Yeah. But if you start having those conversations before they hit puberty, again, it's going to be a lot easier to have that kind of dialogue. So again, I think the key piece in all of this, which we talked about, is let's not have shame on it. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts, Kailey? Did I miss anything while I was talking about that?
I think this is great. I think there are a lot of further avenues we could explore in subsequent podcasts, but I know that we've been chatting for an hour. Isn't that hard to believe?
I didn't think we would be able to talk about this for that long, but as soon as you started talking, it got stuff going off in my brain. I'll say one more thing, just real quick, because this is an important anecdote that I think points out to a lot of things that we've discussed today. And if they're listening, some friends of mine, I had this conversation with them, and no judgment, no shame on them. But I do remember a couple Halloweens ago, it was the night that I usually play board games with some friends, and kids were out trick-or-treating. And someone, probably a teenage boy, thought it would be really funny to wear a costume that was essentially a giant penis. It was just this, those inflatable
like the
dinosaurs, but it was a penis. And some of my friends, some of the other adults in our area hated that. And they thought, what are we exposing our kids to? Oh my God, this is terrible. And I, as a sex positive therapist, had a very different reaction. I thought it was great. I thought it was hilarious. And I thought, oh my God, what a wonderful way to point to your child when they ask the question, Mom, Dad, what is that? That's a penis. And that's funny in the context of here is somebody that is, making fun of, penises can be really silly. Penises can be scary. Let me validate that too. But when you think about what a penis is, it's this thing that hangs off your body. It's weird. It's silly.
Are we gonna get like bleeped to cut off because we keep using?
Maybe we will. I don't know. But
it's a good point, though. Yeah, it could have. Yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. That could have been some conversation openers, but
it's a great opener for conversation. And if you have a kid that has experienced abuse, that I think is where maybe some people are afraid of, like, well, that could be really scary.
Absolutely.
And let me validate that. Yeah. But if your kid was abused in a car, if your kid was abused in the kitchen of a house, we don't want to stop getting into a car. We don't want to stop going into the kitchen. What we want to do is create safety around the thing that we might be afraid of. And no, you're not grooming children by having these conversations early. You're not grooming your kid by letting them be around an inflatable penis. That's not what grooming is. Grooming happens when there is an adult that is considered safe to that child and begins to expose them to things that they shouldn't be exposed to, like pornography, like hugging or touching in a way that an adult should not be hugging or touching a kid. That's grooming. Talking about sex, talking about suicide, talking about death does not set your child up to be abused later in life. What does set your child up to be abused, as you put so well, Kailey, is not giving your kid the autonomy to say no, is not giving your kid the ability to assert themselves with an adult or have the knowledge to communicate what's happening with another adult. So, in summary,
well said.
Inflatable penises, they're great. We should have more inflatable penises and more inflatable vulvas in the world.
Our dogs don't like inflatable blow-up costumes, so they get very scared of them because they're very noisy. And our dogs don't like that.
Well, and they're big and they're scary. They also don't like hot air balloons because there's this giant thing floating. We have a lot of hot air balloons that lift off in our backyard because we're next to a big county park where they do Balloon Fest every year around the end of June. So definitely the last week of June and the first week of July is not a good time for our dogs between Balloon Fest and fireworks.
No,
so
not at all.
No. All right. Okay. I think I said enough stuff to get us in trouble with a lot of people. Is there anything else that I need to say to get us in any more trouble?
Talk to your kids. It's okay.
Yeah, talk to your kids. It's okay to talk to your kids.
The world is big and it's maybe seems scary, but the world and its complexity and nuances and vastness, I think, is also, there's a lot of opportunity, right? And we can create and explore with the kids in our lives. And I think that's a really powerful thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, and I will say one cool resource that I do know of to talk to your kids about sex is Amaze, AMAZE. It's a sex positive resource. I think they have YouTube videos, cartoons, animated stuff that are age appropriate to talk to kids. So I couldn't remember the book, but for sure, let me point out Amaze. It seems to be a really
and we'll provide
cool
other resources on our social media related to, different grief resources, etc. But I think, is that all for today?
I think that's all. Okay. Yeah, we talked a lot longer than we thought we would.
Yeah.
We got ourselves into a lot of trouble by saying penis and vagina and vulva, and we talked a lot about death and funerals. If anybody ever has any questions, don't hesitate to post on our social media platforms. You can always, by the way, I don't know if we've ever said, we have a counseling practice called Refuge Counseling. You ever want to?
We did in our first episode.
We probably did. But if you ever want to reach out to us at Refuge Counseling, you can find us there. Our website is www.allrefuge.com. And yeah, we're on YouTube now too, by the way.
Fancy.
So look at us.
Thanks, everybody.
Have a good day. Thank you. Thank you, Kailey. Thank you, Dr. Bradley.
Can't it hurt? Help me speak the word.